Success does not run from you because you are not chasing hard enough. It may run from you because the person doing the chasing is still ruled by fear, still ruled by emptiness, still ruled by the desperate need to be chosen by something outside before feeling worthy within. You have been told all your life to pursue harder, to reach further, to want it more than anyone else in the room. But James Allen saw something the chasers never see. He saw that the inner condition of the person doing the chasing determines whether what they chase moves toward them or quietly withdraws. There is an inner change after which success no longer feels like something you hunt. It begins to recognize you. The outer world, which once seemed to ignore every effort and resist every plan, begins to respond differently. Not because luck shifted, not because circumstances suddenly became fair, but because the person has shifted. James Allen taught that outer results follow inner condition with the precision of a law. You are not about to receive a motivational speech. You are about to receive a diagnosis, and the diagnosis begins right now. Think about the last time you chased a client and felt the desperation behind the smile. Think about the last time you sent a message, a proposal, an application, or a follow-up, while something inside you was silently begging to be seen, begging to be chosen, begging for a sign from the outside world that you were finally enough. You have been chasing clients who could feel the need in every word. You have been chasing recognition from people who are still waiting to be recognized themselves. You have been chasing money as though its arrival would finally settle the question your inner self refuses to answer alone. And the exhaustion you feel is not the exhaustion of a person working hard. It is the exhaustion of a person running toward a destination they do not fully believe they deserve to reach. There is a particular kind of tiredness that comes from chasing approval. It is heavier than physical fatigue because it has no clean solution. You cannot simply rest and recover from it. You rest and the hunger is still there when you wake. You succeed at one thing, and within hours the mind is already searching for the next confirmation. The applause fades before the sound has finished. The recognition becomes meaningless the moment it arrives, because the inner self has already moved on to the next question. Was that enough? Did they really mean it? Is it going to last? You are not chasing success. You are chasing a feeling that success keeps promising to give you, but never quite delivers, because that feeling was never stored outside you to begin with. The deepest pain in this pattern is not the failure to reach success. The deepest pain is reaching something that resembles success and still feeling unsuccessful inside. You have seen it happen. A goal arrives, and instead of relief, there is a strange hollowness. Instead of peace, there is a restless shifting to the next target. This is the signal that something foundational has not changed. The inner self still operates from the old condition. The old condition was built in fear, in comparison, in the need for proof, in the belief that the outer world must first confirm what the inner world is too frightened to declare on its own. James Allen understood this trap with precise and uncommon clarity, and what he taught about it will require you to stop, to look inward, and to consider that the one change you have been avoiding may be the only change that matters. James Allen was not a philosopher of comfort. He did not write to soothe the person who wanted reassurance without transformation. He wrote to expose the law that governs every human life, whether the person believes in it or not. He understood that thought is not passive, it is causal. It does not merely react to the world. It creates the conditions from which the world responds. He taught that what a person habitually thinks, they gradually become. And what they gradually become, the world gradually reflects back to them. This is not a metaphor. Allen treated it as a law, as precise and reliable as any law operating in the visible world. His work remains in print more than a century after it was written, not because it flatters the reader, but because it describes reality as it actually functions beneath the surface of appearances. This video will give you the inner change Allen pointed toward. Not a technique, not a tactic, not a temporary confidence exercise you abandon in 3 days. A genuine inner change, a structural shift in what you are building from the inside out. You will understand why success follows character before it follows effort. You will understand why chasing from the wrong inner state is not just ineffective, but actively repelling. you will understand the exact nature of the invisible mechanism that turns inner order into outer opportunity. And by the time this teaching has finished, you will have a clear and actionable protocol for becoming the person that success naturally and inevitably follows. Do not approach this as a passive listening experience. This is a diagnosis and a reconstruction. Alan's law does not accommodate half commitment. The inner change he described is not a weekend project. It is a direction of becoming. But the direction can begin today. It can begin in the next hour. It can begin in the next decision. What you carry inward from this teaching, what you act on quietly and without applause, is where the change starts. And where the change starts, success eventually follows. That is the promise of this teaching. It has been true for every person who ever applied it seriously. It will be true for you. The visible world offers a definition of success that feels obvious because everyone around you agrees on it. Success becomes money. A specific number, a specific account balance, a specific level of income that tells the inner self it has finally arrived. Everything below that number is failure. Everything above it is the goal. The person builds their entire inner life around pursuing the number, measuring themselves against the number, comparing their number to other people's numbers, and feeling the rise and fall of their worth with every fluctuation in the visible financial indicator. This is not prosperity consciousness. This is a trap disguised as ambition, and it keeps the inner self permanently dependent on a moving target it was never designed to satisfy alone. Success becomes applause. It becomes the comment, the like, the share, the review, the recognition from someone in the room whose opinion the viewer has quietly installed as the measuring stick of their worth. Without the applause, the work feels meaningless. Without the recognition, the effort feels wasted. The inner self operates on a reward system calibrated entirely to external validation, which means it has surrendered its stability to forces it cannot control. The moment the applause slows, the inner state collapses. The moment the recognition is withheld, the identity shrinks. A person who requires applause to feel successful has no inner foundation. They have only an outer audience, and an audience that can leave. Success becomes numbers, followers, sales figures, rankings, performance metrics, conversion rates. The mind fills with measurements because measurements feel controllable, and control feels like safety. But the obsession with numbers is often a symptom of inner instability, not a sign of disciplined thinking. The person who measures every external number compulsively is often trying to calculate their way to a certainty that only inner change can actually provide. Numbers fluctuate. Character, once built, holds. The person who has built genuine inner condition does not require a daily performance review to know who they are. The numbers become information, not identity. But the person trapped in visible world thinking has made the numbers into a mirror, and the mirror is merciless. Success becomes status, the title, the association, the room they are in, the people who acknowledge them, the hierarchy they have climbed. Status thinking makes identity fragile because status can be withdrawn. It can be redefined. The person one rank above can diminish it. The person one rank below can challenge it. Status requires constant defense, constant maintenance, constant comparison. Alan would recognize this immediately as a thought pattern built on fear, not on character. Status chasing is the outer world's version of asking for permission to feel worthy. And the person who needs permission will never fully own the confidence they are performing. Success becomes other people choosing the viewer, the client who picks them, the employer who hires them, the partner who selects them, the investor who funds them, the judge who approves them. Every important transition is framed as someone else making the final decision about the viewer's worth. This creates a life orientation of perpetual application. The person is always applying for something, always in audition, always waiting for the decision of an outside authority to confirm or deny what the inner self has not yet decided about itself. Alan's entire philosophy stands against this posture. The person who has built genuine inner condition does not wait to be chosen. They have already chosen themselves, and the world eventually recognizes what has already been decided internally. The viewer chases the sign, not the state. They are not actually chasing success. They are chasing the feeling they believe success will give them. The feeling of safety, the feeling of worthiness, the feeling that the struggle was not wasted, the feeling that they are enough. But those feelings are inner states, not outer prizes. They cannot be reliably delivered by external events. They can only be generated by an inner change of such depth and consistency that the person carries the state into every circumstance rather than waiting for circumstances to deliver the state. This is the fundamental inversion Alan described. The feeling of success must precede the visible evidence of success because the inner state is the cause and the outer result is the effect. Reverse the order and the law cannot operate. They feel empty without external confirmation, and this emptiness drives the chasing. But the emptiness was never designed to be filled by applause, by income, by titles, or by other people's choices. The emptiness is the space left by an undeveloped inner identity. It is the gap between what a person is currently becoming and what they sense they could be. That gap is not filled by getting, it is filled by growing. It is filled by the repeated, quiet, unglamorous discipline of becoming more than you currently are. One thought at a time, one habit at a time, one decision at a time, until the inner self is no longer looking outward for confirmation of what it already knows inwardly to be true. This makes success unstable because identity depends on proof. When identity is built on external proof, every change in external conditions changes the identity. A bad quarter, and the person feels like a failure. A competitor's success, and the person feels lesser. A missed opportunity, and the person feels forgotten. The identity has no fixed ground. It rises and falls with every visible fluctuation, and the person lives in a state of chronic instability disguised as ambition. Alan understood that no amount of outer success can stabilize an identity built on outer proof. Only character, built from the inside out through disciplined thought and consistent action, creates the kind of inner ground that success can actually stand on without sinking. If you are ready to stop chasing success from fear and become success within, leave a comment right now that says, "I become success within." Let those 4 words be more than a comment. Let them be a declaration. Let them be the moment you signal to yourself that the direction of your effort is changing. Not from the outside in, where you chase the proof until exhaustion forces you to stop, but from the inside out, where you build the condition until the proof becomes a natural consequence. The comment is your spoken order. The spoken word carries more weight than most people realize. Speak the truth of what you are becoming before the world has confirmed it. That is exactly what the masters taught, and that is exactly where the inner change begins. The phrase "I become success within" is not wishful thinking. It is not a performance of positivity while the inner state remains unchanged. It is a declaration of direction. It says, "I understand that success is not something I will one day catch. It is something I am in the process of becoming, and the becoming is not waiting for the world to give me permission to begin." The becoming starts now in this moment, with this decision, with this single act of internal orientation toward character over applause, toward discipline over desperation, toward inner order over outer chasing. Write it, mean it, and then allow the rest of this teaching to show you what that change actually looks like in the daily texture of your life. The cost of chasing success from the wrong inner state is not paid in one dramatic collapse. It is paid slowly, daily, in small withdrawals from the inner reserves that were never fully replenished. The first cost is exhaustion, not the clean tiredness that follows a full day of meaningful work. This is a grinding, hollow fatigue that comes from effort disconnected from identity. You work hard, but the effort does not feel like it belongs to you. It feels like a performance for an audience that never gives quite enough. You wake tired before the day has asked anything of you, because the night before you were already calculating tomorrow's chances of finally feeling like enough. The second cost is comparison. The person chasing from fear cannot help but monitor every other person running in the same direction. Every sign of another's progress becomes a measurement of their own inadequacy. Someone younger succeeds, and the inner self interprets this as evidence of personal failure. Someone similar receives recognition, And instead of inspiration, the mind produces jealousy. This is not a character flaw. It is a structural consequence of building identity on external position rather than internal growth. Alan understood that the person who compares constantly has no stable inner measuring stick. They have borrowed other people's progress as the ruler, and borrowed rulers always produce borrowed anxiety. Jealousy is perhaps the most honest signal of the chasing pattern. It reveals precisely what the inner self believes it deserves, but fears it will never receive. There is a specific kind of jealousy that comes from watching someone else succeed at the very thing you have been chasing. It burns because it confirms the fear that success is a limited resource distributed unfairly, and that someone else having it means you cannot. But this belief is itself the disease. Alan's law states that success is a consequence of inner condition, not a prize distributed by fate. The jealous person is not watching a competitor's success. They are watching a mirror that shows them what their own inner change has not yet been willing to produce. Desperation is another cost, and desperation is perhaps the most counterproductive inner state a person can bring to the pursuit of success, because desperation signals to everyone around the person that they are operating from need rather than from value. People can sense need. They respond to it instinctively by withdrawing. The client who senses desperation in a proposal does not trust the person making it. The employer who feels the need behind the application does not feel compelled by it. The investor who detects panic in the pitch finds reasons to decline. Desperation repels exactly what it is chasing because it communicates an inner state of insufficiency, and insufficiency is the opposite of the condition success requires in the person it follows. Inconsistent action is one of the most hidden costs of the chasing pattern. The person who acts only when motivated by external praise will act brilliantly when applause is present and nearly vanish when it is absent. Their output depends on the audience, not on the inner standard. They work hard for a short period following a success, then stall in the silence between confirmations. The world experiences them as unreliable, not because they lack ability, but because their effort is powered by external reward rather than internal discipline. Alan's teaching on character is precisely about this. Character acts without applause. Character continues in the silence. Character shows up on the day no one is watching with the same quality it showed up on the day everyone was watching. The need for validation transforms every interaction into a transaction where the hidden currency is approval. The person needs the conversation to end with them being seen as intelligent, capable, admirable, or worthy. When the conversation delivers that, the inner self feels temporarily safe. When it does not, the inner self spends hours analyzing what went wrong, what impression was left, what the other person must now think. This is not networking. This is not relationship building. This is continuous audition, and it cannot produce the kind of trust that genuine opportunity requires. Trust is built by consistent character over time, not by a series of impressive performances designed to extract validation from every encounter. Quitting when not praised is the logical end of an identity built on applause. The project that no one compliments loses its energy. The effort that produces no visible recognition starts to feel pointless. The person begins to believe that if no one sees the value in the work, perhaps there is no value in the work. But Alan taught the opposite. He taught that value is built in the unseen work, the habit built in private, the discipline exercised when no camera is present, when no follower is watching, when no immediate reward is waiting. The quality of what a person does when no one is observing is the truest measure of the inner condition they are building. And it is that inner condition that eventually produces the outer success that lasts. Overworking to prove worth is a particularly painful version of the chasing pattern. The person does not work hard because they love the craft or because the work itself is meaningful. They work hard to generate proof. They need a volume of evidence large enough to silence the inner doubt. So they produce frantically. They pursue relentlessly. They refuse rest because rest feels like admitting they are not trying hard enough. But the work done to prove worth carries the vibration of its origin. It carries the smell of fear and the weight of desperation. And people encounter that weight, even without naming it. Overwork born from unworthiness produces output that lacks the steadiness of work born from genuine competence and calm character. Fear of rejection shapes every decision in the chasing pattern. The person edits themselves before showing up. They soften the truth to make it more likely to be well received. They present the version of themselves most likely to be approved rather than the version most fully themselves. This continuous self-editing is exhausting, but more importantly, it prevents the world from encountering the actual person. And if the world is encountering a performance rather than a person, any success that results belongs to the performance, not to the person. The person knows this, which is why even visible success does not resolve the inner question. The real self was never in the room. Only the approved version was, and the approved version can never carry the weight of genuine fulfillment. The final and perhaps most disorienting cost is feeling unsuccessful even when progress appears. The goal is reached, the metric improves, the recognition comes, and yet the inner state has not changed. The old condition is still operating. The fear is still present. The comparison is still running. The need for the next confirmation is already forming. This is the moment when the chasing pattern reveals itself most clearly as a structural problem, not a circumstantial one. The problem was never the lack of success. The problem was the inner state from which success was being pursued. Until that state changes, no external arrival will settle it. James Allen knew this. He built his entire philosophy on this truth. And now you are ready to understand exactly what he prescribed as the remedy. Allen's law does not begin with action. It does not begin with strategy. It does not begin with opportunity or circumstance or the generosity of those in a position to grant access. It begins with thought, habitual thought, ritual. The thought that a person returns to again and again. The thought that becomes the lens through which every experience is interpreted. The thought that quietly shapes the inner condition, whether the person is paying attention to it or not. Thought, Allen taught, is not passive background noise. It is active. It is constructive. It builds, layer by layer, the inner condition from which the entire outer life proceeds. This is the first principle. Nothing downstream can change in a lasting way until the thought upstream has changed. Inner condition becomes character. This is the bridge Allen placed between thought and destiny. A person does not jump from a single thought to a transformed life. They move through character, through the accumulated, habituated pattern of thought and response that becomes the person's reliable inner orientation. Character is not personality. It is not charm. It is not the impression managed for an audience. Character is what operates when no one is watching. It is the private decision made when the easy option is tempting. It is the standard maintained when no one would notice a lower standard. It is the inner agreement the person keeps with themselves when breaking it would cost nothing visibly but everything structurally. Character forms habits, and habits are the living architecture of the inner condition. A habit is a thought that has become so familiar, so well-worn in the mind, that it no longer requires deliberate effort. It simply moves. The person who has developed the habit of disciplined effort does not debate whether to show up today. They show up because showing up is now part of who they are. The person who has developed the habit of speaking with dignity does not calculate whether honesty is worth it today. They speak with dignity because it is the only language their character currently knows. Habits once built from genuine inner change do not require motivation. They require only maintenance of the condition from which they grew. Habits form competence. This is where the invisible process begins to produce visible evidence. The person who has disciplined their thought into consistent character and allowed that character to build reliable habits will find that their actual ability in their chosen work grows, not because they attended a course or acquired a credential, though those may be part of the path, but because consistent disciplined practice produces real skill. Real skill is not performed, it is possessed. And possession of genuine competence produces a specific kind of inner confidence that cannot be faked, purchased, or borrowed. It is confidence earned through accumulated private effort, and the world encounters it as authority. Competence forms trust. This is the mechanism through which inner work becomes outer opportunity. When a person has genuine competence, when they show up consistently and deliver reliably, when their character produces a predictable standard of output, the people around them begin to trust them, not because of what the person said about themselves, not because of how they presented themselves in a moment of visible impression management, but because the pattern of their behavior over time has communicated a truth that cannot be manufactured. This person can be counted on. Trust is the currency of real opportunity, and it is a currency that cannot be counterfeited. It can only be earned through the slow, patient accumulation of character-driven consistency. Trust attracts opportunity. The person who has built genuine trust does not need to chase every door. Doors begin to open from unexpected directions because the person's reputation has traveled ahead of their application. Someone mentions their name, someone refers their work, someone remembers the quality they delivered without being asked, and connects them to a situation where that quality is needed. Opportunity begins arriving laterally and vertically from angles the desperate chaser never anticipated, precisely because the person is no longer broadcasting need. They are broadcasting competence, reliability, and inner stability, and the world is hungry for exactly that. Opportunity creates income. This is not a guarantee of a specific number by a specific date. It is a description of how the process actually moves. Inner change produces character. Character produces competence. Competence produces trust. Trust produces opportunity. And opportunity, acted on with the same consistent discipline that built it, produces the visible prosperity that the viewer has been trying to reach from the wrong direction. The viewer who understands this does not feel impatient with the process. They feel something more useful, clarity. They know what to build. They know where the work actually is. And they can stop wasting energy on the chasing pattern that never delivered what it promised. Therefore, success follows character before it follows effort. This is Alan's essential reversal of conventional thinking. Most people believe success follows effort, and in a narrow sense, effort is necessary. But effort without the character that gives it direction, consistency, and genuine quality is just desperate motion. It produces heat without forward movement. It produces noise without signal. Alan's law is more precise than the conventional version. It says, build the inner condition first. Build the character. Build the habits. Build the competence. Build the trust. And then when success arrives, it will arrive as the natural consequence of what you have genuinely become, rather than as a reward for how hard you appeared to be trying. You have been told that success comes to the person who chases hardest, that the one who wants it most will get it, that the distance between you and success is simply the gap between your current effort and maximum effort. This belief has been cultural permission to exhaust yourself indefinitely without examining whether the effort is coming from the right place. It has turned the pursuit of success into a competition of suffering, where the person willing to sacrifice the most for the longest is awarded the prize. Alan did not describe this law. Alan described a different law entirely. And the difference between the two is the difference between a life of permanent straining and a life of compounding becoming. The disruption begins here. Chasing from fear repels what character would attract. Say that slowly enough to feel it. The act of chasing from fear, from the inner state of scarcity, of not enoughness, of desperate need, does not accelerate success. It signals to the world a condition that success does not follow. Because success, as Alan understood it, follows order. It follows stability. It follows the person who has built an inner environment capable of receiving and holding it. Fear signals disorder. Fear signals instability. Fear signals a person whose identity is contingent on the outcome, which is precisely the kind of person who cannot be trusted with the outcome, and whose behavior will confirm that untrustworthiness under pressure. Consider the person who pursues a client from genuine confidence in the value they provide. They communicate clearly. They hold their standard. They do not bend the offer in desperation. They follow up once with dignity and allow the client to decide. Now consider the person who pursues the same client from fear, from the anxiety of needing this sale to confirm their worth. They communicate too much. They lower the price before being asked. They are visibly eager in a way that feels uncomfortable. They follow up too many times in too short a span. The client senses the difference. The first person is trusted. The second person is doubted, not because of their actual competence, but because their inner state was broadcasting its own unreliability. The world eventually trusts the person who has already become internally trustworthy. This is the mechanism Alan described. Trust is not granted by the world first and then built within. It is built within first and then recognized by the world. The person who waits for the world to trust them before they build their inner trustworthiness will wait indefinitely. The world does not grant trust as a gift. The world recognizes trust as a signal, and the signal must be present in the inner condition before it can be read in the outer behavior. Become internally trustworthy. Build the habits that express that trustworthiness, and the world will eventually, reliably, recognize what is being broadcast. Success is attracted to order, not desperation. Order means inner stability. Order means consistent behavior that does not change with every shift in external conditions. Order means a person whose output tomorrow will be roughly equivalent to their output today, not because they are mechanical, but because their character is stable. Desperation, by contrast, produces erratic output. It surges when things look promising and collapses when they look uncertain. It generates brilliant bursts followed by long withdrawals. It is visibly dependent on external conditions in a way that makes it unreliable. And unreliability, in the economy of trust, is the one currency no one wants to hold. You may have believed that desire was the primary engine of success. And desire matters. Hunger for growth is not the enemy. But there is a specific kind of hunger that Alan distinguished clearly from the genuine desire to become. It is the hunger that grasps, that compares, that needs reassurance at every turn, that measures itself hourly against everyone around it. This hunger does not build anything durable. It consumes what it finds and immediately needs more. The desire Alan honored was the deep, settled, disciplined intention to become more, to serve more, to produce more genuine value, to grow into a person whose competence is undeniable and whose character is unmistakable. That kind of desire does not repel success. It is the very condition from which success eventually grows. The belief that success comes to the hardest chaser produces one final and dangerous consequence. It convinces the person that every difficulty they face is a sign they need to chase harder. Every closed door is a signal to knock louder. Every rejection is evidence to try more frantically. Every slow period is confirmation that they are not doing enough. But Alan's law suggests a different diagnosis for closed doors and slow periods. It suggests looking inward before looking outward, not because the outer work is irrelevant, but because the outer work is powered by the inner condition. If success is not arriving despite effort, the first question is not how to exert more force. The first question is what inner condition is the force currently coming from. This is the disruption. The solution is not to chase harder. The solution is to become more genuinely, to stop performing success for an audience and start building success as a permanent feature of the inner landscape, to stop borrowing confidence from visible results and start generating confidence from accumulated competence, to stop waiting for success to confirm your identity and start allowing your identity to attract success as its natural consequence. Alan's entire body of work was a precise, patient instruction manual for exactly this inversion. And the person who truly understands the disruption will never return to the old pattern, not because chasing becomes impossible, but because it becomes obviously unnecessary. There is a distinction at the heart of Alan's teaching that most people who have heard of him have never fully absorbed. It is the distinction between pursuing success from hunger and becoming the person success can safely follow. Later in this teaching, we will reveal exactly what separates these two states and why crossing from one to the other changes everything about how the world responds to you. But before that revelation, it is worth sitting with the contrast, because the contrast itself is already a diagnostic tool. Ask yourself honestly, which of these two orientations is currently driving your effort? Hunger grasps. This is the first diagnostic point. The person acting from hunger reaches too quickly for results they have not yet built the inner condition to receive and sustain. They reach for a client before their competence fully justifies the trust. They reach for a platform before their consistency has anything reliable to place on it. They reach for recognition before the work has developed the depth that genuine recognition requires. Grasping is not ambition. It is fear wearing ambition's clothes. And the thing being grasped almost always recedes, not because the world is unkind, but because the inner condition is not yet spacious enough to hold what it is reaching for. Character builds. This is the alternative orientation. Where hunger grasps at the outcome, character builds the foundation. Character is not in a hurry because it is not running from fear. It is moving toward excellence. It chooses the longer path not because it lacks desire, but because it understands the law. The quality of what you build inwardly determines the quality of what can be sustained outwardly. The person building character is not passive. They are intensely active, but their activity is directed inward, and then outward in that order. Not outward first in the hope that something will eventually shift inward by force of result. Hunger compares, and comparison is the inner life's most effective saboteur. Every moment spent measuring the self against someone else's visible position is a moment stolen from building the inner condition that would make the comparison irrelevant. Alan understood that the person who compares has no internal standard. They have borrowed the standard of another person's life and are constantly failing to live up to it. Not because they lack the ability to build their own standard, but because they have not yet committed to building from the inside out. Character disciplines. It holds the internal standard. It improves the private output. It measures itself against its own potential, not against someone else's current position. Hunger needs applause. And this need, as we have already seen, makes the entire inner structure dependent on an unreliable external power source. Character acts unseen. This is perhaps the most important and most difficult principle Alan advanced for a generation trained on visibility, metrics, and constant social feedback. Acting without applause is not martyrdom. It is not self-deprivation. It is the highest form of inner confidence, the confidence that the work has value, regardless of whether anyone is currently observing it. The person who can act with full commitment when no one is watching has built something that no external condition can dismantle, because the source of their drive is interior, not borrowed. Hunger panics when conditions change, when a plan fails, when a door closes, when a competitor appears, when the market shifts. Hunger produces fear, and fear produces either frantic overreaction or paralyzed inaction. Both are destructive. Both signal to the world an inner instability that makes the person less trustworthy under exactly the conditions where trustworthiness is most needed. Character continues. It adapts the method while holding the inner standard. It keeps building when the external signals are uninspiring. It persists through periods where nothing visible is confirming the effort, because it is not dependent on visible confirmation to know that the direction is correct. The open loop that carries through the rest of this teaching is this. What is the precise inner change that crosses a person from the hunger state into the character state? What does it look like in practice? What does it require? What must be surrendered? And what becomes possible on the other side? These are the questions that drive the next sections of this teaching, and they are worth holding with care, because the answer is not a simple switch. It is not a decision made once and never revisited. It is a daily, ongoing practice of becoming, and its fruits are not always visible immediately, but they are real, they accumulate. And when the inner change has genuinely taken hold, the outer world begins responding in ways the chasing pattern could never have produced. The contrast between hunger and character is also the contrast between two different relationships with time. Hunger is urgent because it is afraid. It needs results now because waiting feels like losing. Character is patient because it is building. It understands that what is being constructed inwardly has a timeline determined by the depth of the building, not by the fear of delay. And this patience is not resignation. It is not passive waiting for something to happen. It is the active, engaged, disciplined patience of a person who knows exactly what they are building and understands that the building itself is not wasted time. It is the most productive time available to them. What you carry forward from this section is not a technique, it is an orientation. Turn inward, before turning outward, build before reaching, become before claiming. Let your effort carry the weight of character rather than the weight of fear. And then, as Allen's law describes with unmistakable precision, watch what happens when the world encounters a person whose inner condition has become a genuine invitation for success to follow. The full revelation of how this works mechanically, invisibly and practically is what the next section of this teaching will now address. The mechanism by which inner change produces outer success is invisible in the sense that it cannot be photographed or placed in a spreadsheet, but it is not mysterious. It is logical, consistent, and entirely observable by anyone willing to trace the chain of causation carefully. The mechanism begins with thought, as Allen taught. Thought, when habitual and consistent, produces an atmosphere. Not a physical atmosphere, but an inner atmospheric condition, a felt quality of being that radiates outward in the way a person carries themselves, speaks, listens, decides, and responds. This is not metaphysics without substance. It is the observation that human beings are extraordinarily sensitive to the inner condition of those around them, and they respond to that condition whether or not they can articulate what they are sensing. Atmosphere becomes behavior. The inner condition does not stay sealed inside the person. It becomes the behavior the person exhibits naturally and consistently over time. The person whose inner atmosphere is one of genuine competence and calm confidence behaves differently from the person whose inner atmosphere is anxiety and need. The confident person asks clearer questions. They deliver more honest assessments. They hold their position under pressure without becoming brittle. They listen without the distortion of ego defending itself. Every one of these behavioral expressions is a direct translation of the inner condition into the outer world, and every one of them is noticed by the people who encounter the person, even when those people do not consciously identify what they are responding to. Behavior becomes reputation. Reputation is the accumulated record of behavior over time. It is built slowly, interaction by interaction, decision by decision, in the mind of every person who has ever encountered the individual. And reputation is perhaps the most powerful force in the economic and social life of any person, because it travels independently of the person. Reputation enters the room before the person does. It speaks on the person's behalf at every table where they are being discussed. It either opens doors or quietly closes them in the moments where no application has yet been made and no impression is being actively managed. The person who manages their behavior manages their reputation, and the person who manages their reputation from genuine inner change rather than from performance creates a reputation that holds under examination. Reputation becomes trust. When a person's reputation communicates consistency, competence, and integrity over a meaningful span of time, the people who encounter it begin to extend trust. And trust, in the social and economic life of any community, is the most valuable and most transferable form of currency available to a human being. Trust can be called in without warning. It can open doors that money alone cannot open. It can cause someone to make a phone call on your behalf, to include your name in a conversation where you were not present, to advocate for you in a room you did not know existed. Trust is not passive, it is actively generative. It moves through networks, through communities, through relationships, and it creates openings that the desperate chaser with no reputation of substance will never find, because trust was never built to call upon. Trust creates invitations. This is where the invisible mechanism produces its first clearly visible result. An invitation is different from an application. An application is the chasing pattern, the person presenting themselves for judgment and hoping to be selected. An invitation is the character pattern, the person being sought because someone with influence has decided their inner condition, expressed through reputation, justifies the opportunity. Invitations arrive in forms that the rational mind cannot predict or plan for. A former colleague who remembers your work ethic recommends you for an opportunity you did not know existed. A satisfied person shares your name with someone in a position to open a significant door. A piece of work you completed without any expectation of recognition is encountered by exactly the person who needed to see it. Invitations create opportunities, and opportunities, for the person who has built genuine inner condition, are not terrifying. They are not moments of sudden exposure where the performance must scale to match the promise. For the person of character, opportunities are simply the next arena in which to apply what has already been built. The person who has been disciplined in private does not collapse under a larger public demand. They expand into it because the inner condition was already larger than the visible life had yet had room to express. This is one of the most profound aspects of Allen's law. The inner development a person undertakes in invisible private circumstances does not disappear when larger visible circumstances arrive. It transfers, it scales, it applies. Opportunities create income, and income here is understood not only as money, but as every form of return that flows back to a person whose inner condition has become a reliable producer of value. Recognition, relationship, resource, reach, and financial compensation are all forms of income available to the person whose character has created the conditions for trust and invitation. The visible financial result may be the last to appear in the sequence, but it appears as the consequence of everything that came before it, not as an isolated event dependent on luck or timing. When income arrives this way, it does not feel like a windfall. It feels like the natural conclusion of a process that began much earlier in the invisible territory of thought and becoming. The inner change precedes the visible reward. This sequence cannot be reversed. The world cannot deliver lasting visible reward to a person whose inner condition has not yet been prepared to receive and sustain it. It has been tried. People have received money, recognition, and opportunity before their inner condition matched the requirement, and in most cases the visible success collapsed relatively quickly, not because fate was unkind, but because the inner structure was not yet load-bearing. What a person receives, they can only keep if who they are can hold it. Building who you are, building the inner condition, building the character, building the habits of trustworthy, consistent, disciplined behavior is therefore not a preliminary exercise before the real work begins. It is the real work. Everything visible follows. People sense consistency. This is a quiet and powerful truth embedded in Allen's law. Human beings, even those with no conscious spiritual orientation, possess a deep and reliable instinct for identifying consistency in others. They may not be able to name it immediately. They may not consciously know what they are responding to, but they feel when someone is the same in private and in public. They feel when the quality of a person's work does not change with the size of the audience. They feel when the dignity a person brings to small interactions is identical to the dignity they bring to large ones. And this sensed consistency over time produces a depth of trust that no amount of impressive single performances can match. Doors open to stable character. Not every door. Not always at the moment the person feels ready. Not always in the form they had imagined or planned for. But doors open. They open from directions the chasing mind could not have predicted, because the chasing mind was too focused on the visible doors in front of it to notice the invisible doors forming in the periphery. Character does not choose its own doors. It creates the conditions for doors to form and then walks through the ones that open. This is the certain way Allen described, not forcing, not manipulating, not begging, becoming, and then acting on the open door with the same consistent discipline that built the character that created the door in the first place. Success follows the person who has stopped begging to be chosen. This is perhaps the most liberating sentence in Allen's entire philosophical legacy. The moment a person stops positioning their worth as a question to be answered by external judgment and starts building their worth as a project already in progress, the entire relationship between the self and success changes. The person is no longer an applicant. They are a builder. And what they are building, slowly, privately, consistently, with discipline that does not depend on daily visible confirmation, is the most reliable engine of outer success that has ever been described by any serious student of human possibility. Allen described it more than a century ago. It remains true with unchanged precision today. The invisible mechanism does not require the viewer to abandon ambition. It does not require patience as a form of passivity. It requires patience as a form of disciplined, active becoming. The viewer who understands this mechanism does not sit and wait for the world to notice them. They build, every day, in the areas of thought, character, habit, and competence. They act without waiting for applause. They improve without waiting for measurement to confirm the improvement. They continue without waiting for visible confirmation that the continuation is worthwhile. And the world, which is always constantly, reliably scanning for people whose inner condition has reached the threshold of trustworthy consistency, eventually finds them. And when it finds them, it does not leave them unchosen. It follows them. There are two ways to orient the self toward success. One is through command, the other is through plan. Most people are familiar with the plan and have spent their entire productive lives inside it. The plan is the outer structure of the pursuit. The goals written down, the steps laid out, the timeline assigned, the metrics tracked, the methods chosen, the strategies adjusted. Plans are not wrong. Plans have their place. But a plan without the command underneath it is a structure built on sand. It collapses under the first serious pressure because the inner state that is executing the plan has no stable foundation. The command is not a plan. The command is an identity-level decision. It says, I become the person success follows. Not I will get success through this method. I become the person success follows. The difference between these two orientations is not subtle once you have seen it. The plan says, if I do these things, I will get that result. It is entirely conditional. Its power depends on the conditions cooperating. If the conditions shift, the plan becomes uncertain, and the inner state behind the plan becomes anxious. The command says, I am in the process of becoming the person whose inner condition makes success a natural consequence. It is unconditional. It is not dependent on the conditions confirming it. It continues regardless of what the visible world is or is not currently delivering. The command is an inner instruction to the character, and the character builds toward it with or without external reward along the way. The plan needs character to have any real power. This is the insight most people miss when they fall in love with strategy. They assume the quality of the plan is the primary determinant of the quality of the result. But the plan is only as reliable as the character executing it. A brilliant plan, executed by a person whose inner condition is fearful, inconsistent, and validation-dependent, will underperform a modest plan executed by a person of genuine character and disciplined consistency. The plan does not overcome the person. The person, and specifically the inner condition of the person, determines what the plan can actually deliver. Give the same plan to two people with different inner conditions and watch two entirely different outcomes unfold. Without inner change, the plan is desperate. This is easy to recognize in retrospect, but nearly impossible to see while living inside it. The desperate plan keeps adjusting its strategy without examining its inner source. It pivots constantly because nothing is quite working. It chases trends because those seem to offer a shortcut to the result the inner state is urgently demanding. It borrows other people's methods because its own methods have not produced the quick confirmation it needed. The desperate plan works intensely for short periods and then collapses into confusion, doubt, and the exhausted question, why is this not working? The answer, which the plan never provides, is that the plan was never the problem. The inner condition behind the plan was. With inner change, the plan becomes calm and effective. The person of genuine character who approaches a plan does not need the plan to succeed immediately. They need the plan to be honest, to be aligned with the inner standard they are building, and to be executed with the same consistency they bring to everything else. They are not attached to the plan in the way the desperate chaser is attached. They can adjust it without panic. They can release it when the evidence suggests a better direction without interpreting the adjustment as a sign of failure. They execute the plan as an expression of their inner condition rather than a rescue attempt from it. And this distinction in the inner posture produces a measurable difference in the quality of the execution. The command stabilizes action. When the deep inner orientation is, I become the person success follows, every action is evaluated against that standard. The question is not, will this action produce immediate visible results? The question is, Does this action belong to the person I am becoming? Does it express the inner standard I am building? Is it the action of a person whose character is worth following? This question stabilizes the choice-making process in a profound way. It removes the frantic energy of result chasing from every decision and replaces it with the steady, purposeful energy of becoming. The action taken from becoming carries a different quality than the action taken from desperation. And that quality is felt by everyone the action touches. The plan organizes action. The plan has its place once the command has been established. Once the inner orientation is stable, the plan becomes a useful organizing tool for directing the expression of the inner condition into specific areas of activity. The plan tells the character where to show up. The character determines how to show up. The plan provides the arena. The character provides the content. Together they produce the kind of consistent, quality-driven effort that Alan described as the visible expression of genuine inner development. But the sequence must be honored. The command first, the inner state first, the character building first, and then the plan, held lightly, executed faithfully, adjusted intelligently, without the desperate attachment that destroys its own effectiveness. Success follows the state behind the action. This is the essence of Alan's teaching on the relationship between inner condition and outer result. Two people can execute the same action in the same context and produce different results. Not always, not in every case, but consistently over time. The person whose inner state carries genuine confidence, genuine care, and genuine competence produces better results than the person whose inner state carries fear, need, and performance. Because the state is not hidden, it expresses itself in the texture of the action, in the word chosen, in the pause before responding, in the level of attention brought to detail, in the quality of follow-through, in the dignity carried under pressure. All of these are outputs of the inner state, and they all contribute to the world's assessment of who this person actually is. The viewer must become the condition before demanding the outcome. This may be the most direct corrective line this teaching can offer. Demanding outcomes before becoming the condition required to receive them is the structural error Alan's entire philosophy was written to correct. Demanding clients before becoming consistently trustworthy is grasping without character. Demanding income before becoming genuinely valuable is claiming without building. Demanding recognition before becoming consistently excellent is visibility without substance. In every case, the demand precedes the becoming, and the law does not honor the sequence. The law honors only one direction: inner first, then outer. Become first, then receive. Build first, then attract. This is not delay. This is the only sequence that actually works. If this teaching is helping you understand that success is not something you catch, but something you become, subscribe to the Master's Legacy right now. This channel exists to preserve and interpret the timeless laws of mind, character, source, and inner transformation that the old masters described with a precision and a depth that modern content rarely reaches. Every video here is built from the same philosophy, that the inner life is the origin of the outer life, and that the person who understands this law and builds from it consistently is building towards something that lasts. Subscribe so that each new teaching is delivered directly to you, as this channel continues to reveal what the Masters actually taught and what it means for your life today. The Master's Legacy does not offer shortcuts. It does not promise instant transformation. It offers the same patient, serious, law-based instruction that Wallace D., Wattles James Allen, Florence Scovel Shinn, and those who understood invisible supply, source-centered prosperity, and the power of the inner condition offered to their own generation. These teachings have outlasted every trend that surrounded them. They continue to produce results for every person who applies them honestly and with genuine commitment. Subscribe and bring the same commitment to this channel that Alan urged his readers to bring to the building of their own character. The depth you are willing to go determines the quality of what the teaching can give you. The old mind, the mind operating from the chasing pattern, the mind calibrated to fear and external confirmation, cannot calculate the opportunities that become available when character genuinely changes. This is not a limitation of human intelligence, it is a limitation of the vantage point from which the mind is looking. The chasing mind can only see the doors that are already visible. It cannot see the doors that will form as a consequence of inner change, because those doors do not yet exist. They are being created by the process of becoming, and no amount of calculation, planning, or strategic mapping can predict the precise moment, form, or direction from which trust will activate a door that currently does not appear anywhere on the map. The mind cannot predict who will trust you after you become consistent. Consistency over time creates a radius of trust that extends far beyond the relationships the person is consciously managing. People observe consistency indirectly. A client mentions it to a colleague. A collaborator recalls it in a conversation months later. A person who encountered the work once and said nothing at the time returns much later with a significant opportunity because the memory of the quality has been quietly compounding in their mind. These movements are invisible to the calculating mind. They cannot be forced or timed. They are generated by character and delivered by the mechanism of trust, and their arrival cannot be scheduled, only prepared for by continuing to build. The mind cannot calculate doors that open because your character changes. New character produces new behavior. New behavior produces new impressions. New impressions produce new responses from people who previously responded differently. The employer who once passed over the applicant may encounter the same person 2 years after a genuine inner change and experience an entirely different quality of presence. The market that once seemed indifferent to the work may encounter the same work after the creator has grown into a deeper level of competence and respond with an entirely different level of engagement. These shifts cannot be mapped in advance. They can only be produced by the inner change and then recognized when they arrive. Become the person, and the path begins responding differently. This is not mystical language. It is the practical description of how human social and economic systems actually function. Systems of trust, opportunity, and resource allocation respond to character because character is the most reliable predictor of future behavior. When a person's character genuinely changes, the signals it sends into those systems change. The signals change the responses those systems generate. The responses open different doors than were previously available. And because the change was genuine and not performed, the new doors, when walked through, do not immediately close again the way the doors obtained through desperate performance often do. The releasing of the how is therefore not a passive act of giving up control. It is the recognition that the how is not within the reach of the current mind's calculation. The how will be revealed by the process of becoming, not discovered by the process of planning. The viewer who releases the demand to know exactly how success will arrive before they commit to building toward it will discover, once the inner change has genuinely occurred, that the path presents itself with a clarity and a timeliness that no amount of prior planning could have improved on. The source, as the old masters understood it, sees more than the calculating mind, and what the source can organize through the agency of genuine inner development exceeds what the mind could have arranged through strategy alone. Consider the magnet. A magnet does not chase iron, it does not pursue it across a surface in frantic competition with other magnets. It draws, it attracts. And the strength of what it draws, and the distance from which it draws it, is determined entirely by the nature of the magnetic field it generates. A magnet with a weak field barely registers to the iron nearby. A magnet with a strong, clear, undistorted field pulls iron from a distance that would seem disproportionate to its physical size. The difference is entirely internal to the magnet, not external, not dependent on the behavior of the iron, entirely determined by what is happening within the magnet itself. A weak magnet cannot pull iron strongly, and the person who approaches their life from a weak inner condition, an inner condition of scattered thought, fearful expectation, inconsistent effort, and identity built on external confirmation, creates only the weakest form of attraction. The opportunities that respond to this condition are small, unstable, and quickly lost, not because the world is withholding more, but because the magnetic field is not strong enough to draw and hold what the person claims to want. Increasing effort without increasing the inner field does not solve the problem. Pushing the magnet harder toward the iron does not make the magnet stronger. Only changing the inner field changes the pull. A scattered magnet has little force, and inner scattering is precisely the condition produced by the chasing pattern. The person who is simultaneously chasing clients, chasing recognition, chasing money, chasing validation, and chasing a sign that they are enough has a scattered inner field. Their attention is divided across every visible target. Their energy is dispersed across every channel that might possibly deliver confirmation. Their consistency is fractured because they are orienting themselves toward outcomes rather than toward building, and the scattered field produces scattered results, occasional small successes that cannot be held, brief moments of encouragement followed by extended periods of apparent silence from the world. A clear magnet attracts, and clarity, in Alan's terms, means a clearly held inner state of identity and purpose. It means the person who knows who they are becoming, who has committed to building the inner condition that matches the outer life they intend to inhabit, and who brings that clarity to every action without scattering it across every visible opportunity that presents itself. Clarity is not narrow. It does not mean the person ignores everything except one goal. It means the inner condition is coherent, directed, and consistent across every area of effort, so that everything the person does carries the same signature of disciplined, purposeful becoming. Inner condition is the magnet. Character strengthens it. Every act of genuine character development, every private discipline maintained without applause, every habit of honest and excellent work built in the invisible spaces of daily life adds to the strength of the inner magnetic field. The world cannot see the discipline directly, but it feels the field it produces. It encounters the person whose behavior is consistently excellent and whose inner state is consistently stable, and it responds with the kind of trust and invitation that only a strong field can attract. Discipline is not a punishment. It is the process of strengthening the magnet. Faith charges the inner condition. Faith, in Alan's sense, is not naive hope or passive wishing. It is the inner certainty that the law operates reliably for the person who applies it honestly. Faith is the willingness to continue building when the visible results have not yet arrived. It is the refusal to interpret the delay as evidence that the law has failed. It is the maintenance of the inner standard in the absence of outer confirmation. And this maintenance, this charged and certain inner posture, adds a quality to the magnetic field that discipline alone cannot produce. The person who both disciplines and trusts carries a presence that the person who only disciplines without faith does not yet possess. Action positions the magnet. The inner field does not attract from a position of inaction. It requires the person to move, to engage, to place themselves in the arenas where their character can be encountered. Action is the positioning of the magnet in relation to the iron. The person of genuine character, who takes consistent action, who shows up in the relevant arenas without demanding immediate visible results, places their field in the range of the opportunities their character has created the conditions to attract. Action without character is frantic motion in random directions. Character without action is unused potential. Together, they form the complete expression of the law Alan described. Opportunity responds to the field, not always immediately, not always from the expected direction, but with a consistency that the person who has built both inner condition and consistent action begins to recognize as inevitable. The viewer who has been living inside the chasing pattern has been generating a weak or scattered field and cannot understand why the iron does not come. The answer is not effort. The answer is the inner condition from which the effort proceeds. Change the field, build the character, discipline the thought, charge with faith, act consistently without demanding immediate visible return, and the iron, which is simply the world's recognition of a strong and clear inner condition, begins to move. Success follows attraction, created by becoming. The word attraction here is not magical, it is mechanical. It describes the function of the law Alan observed in human life with such precision. Becoming a person of genuine competence, real character, stable inner identity, and consistent disciplined action creates an attraction field in the social and economic environment that draws opportunity, trust, invitation, and eventually visible success toward the person. Not because the universe is rewarding them for good behavior, but because the inner condition they have built is exactly what the world is looking for, and cannot find in the fearful, scattered, desperate chasers who surround every serious opportunity. Become genuinely, build honestly, act consistently, and the attraction does the rest. When the magnetic field of inner condition is distorted by interference, the attraction cannot function as designed. The most common form of interference is chasing clients while feeling fundamentally unworthy of the clients being chased. The person approaches the potential client with their skills and their pitch, but underneath the words is an inner broadcast that says, "Please choose me, because I need to be chosen to feel like I am enough." This broadcast is not spoken aloud, but it is present. It is in the slight over-eagerness of the follow-up, in the lowering of the price before the client has negotiated, in the difficulty of holding the standard when push comes to shove. And clients who are making a trust decision when they hire someone sense it. They may not say they sense it, but the decision reflects it. Chasing recognition while hiding talent is another form of interference that blocks delivery. The person wants to be seen, but the fear of being fully seen and found wanting keeps them showing only the approved and polished surfaces of their work. They present the safe version, the version that will not be criticized, the version that asks the smallest possible question of the audience. But the safe version rarely earns the recognition the person is chasing, because the world does not recognize what is not fully present. Recognition requires exposure. Exposure requires the inner courage that comes from a genuine relationship with one's own worth, not from external applause. The person who waits for applause before exposing their real talent will wait longer than necessary. Chasing money while fearing the responsibility that money brings creates a contradiction that the inner self experiences as a permanent loop. Money arrives in the form of opportunity, and the inner fear of what greater responsibility would require causes the person to subtly undermine the opportunity before it can fully materialize. They procrastinate on the action that would move the financial opportunity forward. They find reasons the timing is not right. They construct invisible obstacles between themselves and the increase they are openly claiming to desire. This is not sabotage in a conscious sense. It is the interference of a fear-based inner condition in a field that is attempting to attract something the fear-based self does not genuinely believe it can hold. Chasing success while resenting successful people distorts the magnetic field with a particularly destructive frequency. Resentment toward those who have what you desire sends a clear inner signal. Success is something that others have at your expense. It is unfairly distributed. It is possessed by people who do not fully deserve it, while people like me who are equally or more deserving are excluded. This narrative may feel like social observation, but in the context of Allen's law, it is an inner block of the first order. You cannot attract toward yourself something you simultaneously resent in others. The inner field cannot hold that contradiction without losing its coherence. The resolution is not to stop desiring success. It is to honor the success of others as evidence that the law operates, which is actually evidence that the law will operate for you. Chasing opportunity while acting inconsistently is perhaps the most transparent form of interference, because inconsistency is visible to everyone while feeling invisible to the person practicing it. The person believes they are working hard. They have intense periods of effort that genuinely feel like the total commitment success requires. But the gaps between intense periods are long. The follow-through on ordinary commitments is unreliable. The small daily disciplines that build character are frequently skipped, and the person cannot understand why opportunity keeps arriving in insufficient amounts. The answer is that opportunity arrives at the level of consistency the world has observed, not at the level of intensity the person produced in their most motivated moments. Chasing confidence while speaking defeat fills the inner field with a frequency that cancels what the effort is trying to build. Every sentence spoken in the language of lack, of impossibility, of my luck, of things never work out for me, or of success is for other people, is a broadcast from the inner self that shapes the conditions of the outer life with far more power than is generally recognized. Allen and Florence Scovel Shinn, in her own work, understood that the spoken word is an order given to the inner conditions that generate the outer life. Chasing confidence through action while simultaneously speaking defeat through the daily language of the inner voice and the outer conversation, is working against oneself with two simultaneous forces of equivalent power. The cancellation is not accidental. It is the predictable result of unresolved interference. Chasing support while refusing discipline produces a person who needs help but has not created the conditions in which reliable support can be safely given. Support requires trust. Trust requires demonstrated consistency. The person who asks for support while their inner condition remains scattered, fearful, and inconsistent is asking the world to invest in a field too weak to generate return. This is not a moral judgment of the person. It is a mechanical description of the law. The support that would make the largest difference will arrive with the greatest reliability when the inner condition has been built to a level that makes the support an acceleration of something already in motion, rather than an attempt to substitute for the inner work that has not yet been done. Chasing results while avoiding character is the root form of every other interference pattern on this list. It is the foundational error that generates every other version of the chasing mistake. When the person is oriented toward the result, without being willing to undergo the inner change required to become the kind of person who can sustainably produce and hold that result, the law cannot deliver what is being demanded. The result that arrives without character arrives temporarily. It is held without character for as long as circumstance allows, and then it departs, often quietly and without obvious cause, leaving the person confused and beginning the chase again from the same inner condition that made the result unsustainable in the first place. The correction is not to stop wanting the result. The correction is to start building the character that makes the result a consequence rather than a gamble. There is an extraordinary freedom available to the person who has genuinely made the inner change Alan described. It is the freedom of not tracking the package. When you ship a package and are confident in the postal service, you do not stand at the door every hour checking for its arrival. You released it, and you trust it to arrive, and you get on with the rest of your life until the knock at the door confirms what you already knew was coming. The person who has built genuine inner condition and is acting with disciplined consistency has, in effect, shipped their success. They have done the inner work, they have sent the signal, the law is operating, and they are free to live fully in the present, acting on the nearest open door, without the anxious need to track every visible movement of the delivery. Do not wait for success to tell you who you are. This single instruction, if genuinely absorbed and practiced, changes the entire texture of daily life. The person who waits for external success to confirm their identity is always in a state of suspended self-worth, always in between what they are now and what the world has not yet told them they are allowed to be. They live in the gap, and the gap is where the chasing pattern lives. The alternative is to decide internally who you are in the process of becoming, to act from that identity before the world has confirmed it, and to allow the world's eventual confirmation to be a pleasant recognition of something you already knew, not a surprising rescue from an identity you were afraid to own alone. Become the person success would recognize, not the person success must discover after extensive searching, not the person success might notice if you try hard enough to get its attention. The person success would recognize at first encounter because the inner condition is unmistakable. Because the quality of the thought, the character of the behavior, the discipline of the habit, and the stability of the identity are all producing a field that success finds familiar, comfortable, and worth following. Recognition requires resemblance. Success recognizes itself. It recognizes the inner state of someone who has already become its nature, who already operates from the inner condition that produces it, who does not need it to confirm their worth because the worth has already been built. External success follows inner legitimacy, and inner legitimacy is not granted by outside authority. It is not conferred by a degree, a title, a number of followers, or the opinion of someone in a powerful position. It is built privately, in the ongoing discipline of thought and action that Alan described as the path of character. The person who has built inner legitimacy carries a quality that the world encounters differently from the person still seeking outer permission to own their worth. They do not apologize for their standard. They do not negotiate their dignity. They do not require every interaction to validate their right to be in the room. They are already legitimate in the only court that ultimately matters, the inner court of the self that has built something real. The freedom of releasing the need for immediate visible confirmation is also the freedom to enjoy the process of becoming. The person who needs every step of the journey to produce visible evidence of progress cannot enjoy the journey. They are too busy measuring it, too busy comparing it, too busy calculating whether it is delivering at the right speed. But the person who has released that demand experiences the daily work of character building as inherently meaningful. The discipline itself is satisfying. The improvement of the craft itself is rewarding. The consistency itself carries a dignity that external applause could never enhance. And in this state of released, trusting, present-focused becoming, the person paradoxically becomes far more attractive to success than they ever were during the anxious period of frantic chasing. The final freedom is the freedom from the exhaustion of performance. The person performing success for an audience is always on stage. Every interaction is a production. Every communication must be managed. Every impression must be crafted. Every silence must be filled with evidence of worth. This is an exhausting existence. The person who has built genuine inner condition does not perform. They simply are. And being, consistently and fully, without the overhead of continuous performance management, releases an enormous amount of inner energy that was previously consumed by the performance. That energy, redirected toward building and acting and becoming, accelerates the very inner development that success is waiting to follow. The freedom that Alan described is not the freedom from effort. It is the freedom from the frantic, fear-driven, approval-seeking effort that masquerades as ambition while consuming the inner life. The freedom is in the directed, purposeful, character-driven effort that belongs to a person who has already decided internally who they are becoming and is now simply, calmly, and with great discipline building the evidence of that becoming in the only place where the law requires it to be built first, within. The first step of the practical protocol is to define the what with precision, not the how, not the timeline, not the strategy, the what. And the what here is not only the external success you desire, it is the inner state that belongs to it. Alan taught that every outer condition has a corresponding inner condition that makes it possible and sustainable. The practical question is not only what do I want to achieve, but who must I become to achieve it and hold it? Begin there. Name the external success with specificity, the income level, the work, the relationship to money and opportunity that you intend to inhabit. Name it clearly enough that you can recognize it when it arrives. But do not stop at the outer description. Go deeper. Ask, what inner state belongs to this level of success? A person at the level of success you are describing, what do they carry inwardly? How do they relate to their own worth? How do they respond to setback? How do they hold their standard under pressure? How patient are they with the process? How consistent is their effort when no one is watching? How do they speak about their work, their future, and their own capacity? These questions are not abstract, they are diagnostic. They reveal the gap between where the inner condition currently stands and where it needs to stand before the outer condition can become a stable and sustained reality rather than a temporary event followed by a familiar collapse. Ask, what habits belong to this level of success? The person at the level of success you are describing is not there by chance. They arrived through a pattern of behavior that was consistent enough for long enough to produce the cumulative result. What are those habits? What does their daily discipline look like? What do they do when they do not feel motivated? What standard do they hold in their private work, the work no one sees, the effort that receives no immediate recognition? Identify those habits with honesty and then compare them to your current daily pattern. The gap between those two habit profiles is the map of the inner change required. It is not a judgment, it is a blueprint. Ask, what speech belongs to this level of success? Alan's teaching, combined with what the masters of the spoken word understood, makes clear that the language a person uses habitually is not a neutral report on reality. It is a creative force that shapes the inner condition and broadcasts the inner signal. The person at your target level of success does not speak habitually in the language of lack, impossibility, resentment, or self-deprecation. They do not regularly announce what will not work, what they cannot do, what the world refuses to provide, or why success is reserved for others. Their speech is not arrogantly unrealistic. It is simply oriented toward the what and the who, toward becoming and building, rather than toward confirming the limitations of the current visible condition. Ask, what emotional maturity belongs to this level of success? Because every level of genuine success demands a specific emotional capacity from the person carrying it. It demands the ability to receive criticism without collapsing, the ability to receive success without losing the discipline that produced it, the ability to endure the periods of invisible building without needing constant visible confirmation, the ability to maintain dignity in both failure and recognition, the ability to relate honestly to other people without the constant filter of self-protection and impression management. These emotional capacities are not innate qualities the person either has or does not have. They are buildable. They develop through practice, through honest self-observation, through the willing encounter with the areas of inner life that the chasing pattern has allowed the person to avoid. Ask, what would success trust in me? This is perhaps the most penetrating question in the entire protocol. Not what do I want from success, but what would success trust in me? What quality, what consistency, what character, what demonstrated pattern of behavior would cause success to recognize in you a person it is safe to follow? Because success, understood through Allen's law, follows reliability. It follows the person whose inner condition makes them a trustworthy custodian of the opportunities and resources that success brings with it. Ask honestly what that quality is in you right now. Ask honestly where it is still developing. And then build toward it with the clarity of a person who knows exactly what the building is for. Ask, what must I become before it arrives? This question is the practical summary of everything Allen's teaching points toward. Not what must I do, not what must I get, not what must I wait for. What must I become? Becoming is the work. Becoming is the inner discipline that precedes the outer delivery. Becoming is the building of character, of habit, of emotional maturity, of disciplined speech, of consistent action. And becoming is not a single event. It is a continuous direction of movement. Every day offers the choice to become more fully the person that success would naturally and inevitably follow. Make that choice deliberately, consciously, and with the full understanding that the law operates exactly as Allen described. Let the statement, "I become the person success naturally follows," be more than an affirmation. Let it be an operating principle. Let it be the question you bring to every decision, every action, every response, every communication, every private discipline, and every moment of choosing between the comfortable option and the character-building option. The statement is a direction. A direction held clearly and consistently enough becomes a trajectory. A trajectory sustained long enough produces a destination, and the destination, when reached, will be inhabited by a person whose inner condition is fully capable of receiving and sustaining what they have built their way toward. The defining of the what is not a one-time exercise. Return to it regularly. As you build, the definition sharpens. As the inner condition develops, the clarity of what belongs to the next level increases. The what is not a fixed target sitting at a specific distance. It is a living, evolving description of the person you are becoming and the life that naturally belongs to that person. Keep the description honest. Keep it specific enough to generate real action. Keep it connected to the inner condition it requires. Hand carry it forward as the organizing principle of every practical decision you make on the path from here to there. The what, properly defined, does the most important work in the entire protocol. It gives the inner self a clear direction, and a clear direction focused consistently enough becomes, as Allen taught, the very condition from which everything visible eventually follows. You are not trying to get, you are building toward becoming. And when the becoming has reached its depth, the getting arrives as the natural and inevitable consequence of a law that has never once failed to operate for the person who applied it with honest discipline and genuine patience. The second step of the practical protocol is to release the how. Not with passive indifference as though the means do not matter, but with the intelligent trust that the how will present itself through the process of becoming, and that premature attachment to a specific how is one of the primary ways the chasing pattern maintains its grip. Alan's teaching on this point is clear. The person of genuine inner condition acts on the nearest open door without demanding to see the entire staircase before taking the first step. The how unfolds in response to the inner condition acting in the present moment. It cannot be fully mapped in advance because many of its components do not yet exist. Begin by identifying where you are currently chasing from fear. Be specific and be honest. Where in your current pursuit of success is the energy coming from a place of anxiety rather than from a place of genuine commitment to becoming? Where are you acting to prove something rather than to build something? Where is the effort motivated by the need to be chosen rather than by the discipline of someone who has already chosen themselves? These are not comfortable questions. They require the kind of honest inner observation that the chasing mind habitually avoids by keeping the focus on external targets. But the identification of the chasing from fear pattern is the beginning of its correction. Stop one validation-seeking behavior. Just one. The protocol does not demand that you transform every pattern simultaneously. It asks for one specific, concrete act of releasing a validation-seeking behavior that has been consuming inner energy without producing the character growth it was designed to avoid. The behavior you stop could be the compulsive checking of metrics after every piece of work. It could be the habit of adjusting your standard based on how the last effort was received. It could be the practice of seeking reassurance from others before making a decision your own judgment has already reached. Identify one, stop it, and observe what the energy freed by that stopping can be redirected toward. Choose one character-building behavior to replace it. The release of a validation-seeking behavior creates space in the inner life, and that space must be filled with something generative rather than simply left empty for the chasing pattern to reoccupy. Choose one behavior that expresses the character of the person success would naturally follow. It does not need to be dramatic. In fact, the most powerful character-building behaviors are almost always undramatic. Show up earlier. Finish what you started yesterday. Improve one element of your craft without being asked or rewarded for the improvement. Keep one promise to yourself that you have been postponing. Do one thing with full commitment that your previous pattern would have done with partial engagement. Act without applause. This is the full expression of the releasing of the how. The how includes not only the route to the result, but also the validation along the way. Releasing the how means releasing the demand for daily confirmation that the work is being seen, appreciated, and measured as sufficient. It means doing the work because the work belongs to the person you are becoming, not because the work will produce the applause that confirms your identity. Alan described this as the highest form of inner strength, the ability to act from inner standard without requiring external response to validate the action. This ability, built through repeated practice, is the precise quality that success recognizes as worth following. Measure identity by discipline, not by reaction. The person who measures their identity by how others react to their work will have a different identity every day, depending on how the audience responded that morning. This is not a stable foundation for any serious endeavor. The person who measures identity by the discipline they brought to the work, by whether they showed up when they did not feel like it, by whether they held the inner standard when lowering it would have been invisible to everyone except themselves, builds an identity with load-bearing walls. The identity built on discipline does not collapse when the audience falls silent. It continues, and the continuation is itself the proof of the inner change that success is waiting to follow. Let the how surprise you. Once the inner condition is genuinely building and the disciplined action is genuine and consistent, begin watching with openness for the doors that form from directions the chasing mind would never have anticipated. The how of success, when it arrives as the consequence of genuine character, rarely looks exactly as it was mapped in advance. It arrives through a conversation you did not plan, through a connection you did not force, through the fruit of a private discipline that suddenly becomes visible to someone positioned to amplify it, through the slow compounding of daily quality that suddenly reaches a tipping point that becomes visible to the world. Be ready to recognize these arrivals. Do not reject them because they did not match the planned route. They are the law delivering through channels the calculating mind could not have designed. The releasing of the how is also the releasing of the timeline. The person who has attached a specific timeline to success and is measuring their progress against that timeline is creating a pressure that distorts the inner condition in exactly the wrong direction. The timeline generates urgency. Urgency generates fear. Fear generates the chasing signal. And the chasing signal weakens the magnetic field. Release the urgency of the timeline without releasing the commitment to the direction. The direction is permanent. The timeline is a projection. Hold the direction with full commitment. Hold the timeline loosely as information rather than as judgment. And let the becoming move at the pace the building of genuine character actually requires, which is always as fast as it needs to be and never as slow as fear interprets it. The how, released, allows the inner self to focus entirely on the what and the who, on defining clearly the person you are becoming and building that person with every available action. This is a fundamentally different inner experience than the chasing pattern provides. It is calmer. It is more sustainable. It requires more genuine courage because it demands that you act without the constant reassurance of visible progress. But it produces something the chasing pattern never can, the deep, settled, radiating inner confidence of a person who is building something real, who knows what they are building, who trusts the law that governs the building, and who is no longer dependent on the world's daily confirmation to know that the direction is right. Release the how as a practice, not once but regularly. Every time the chasing impulse rises, which it will, because the old pattern is deeply habituated, notice it. Name it. Ask whether the action it is proposing comes from the character of the person success follows or from the fear of the person who is still begging to be chosen. Then choose the action that belongs to the person you are becoming. And each time you make that choice, the inner field becomes a little clearer, a little stronger, a little more aligned with the law that Alan described. And each time the field strengthens, the attraction increases. And the attraction eventually becomes the delivery. One of the most consistent experiences of the person who has genuinely made the inner change is that the delivery of success frequently arrives from unexpected directions, not from the direction the chasing mind was staring at so intently, from the side, from behind, from a connection made years earlier that is only now bearing fruit, from a quiet effort that received no attention at the time and is now being recognized precisely because the quality was real and the world eventually finds what is real. Expect surprise, not as a vague hope, but as a specific consequence of the law. The law does not operate only through the visible channels the mind is monitoring. It operates through every available channel, and many of the most powerful channels are the ones the calculating mind was not tracking. Someone notices consistency, not the big, visible, applauded consistency, the small, private, unremarked consistency. The person who has been delivering the same quality of work in a quiet corner of their field, without fanfare, without loud self-promotion, without demanding recognition, will eventually be encountered by someone with enough experience to recognize what quiet consistency actually means. And that recognition, from a person positioned to act on it, can open a door that the loudest and most aggressively self-promoted person in the same field never reached. The world values consistency above almost every other quality in its most serious decisions about trust and investment. A small effort compounds. The work done today in a spirit of genuine character, without attachment to its immediate visible return, does not disappear when no one immediately applauds it. It compounds. It adds to the growing accumulation of quality that represents the person's actual contribution to their field. Each piece of genuine work, each kept promise, each hour of private discipline, each interaction handled with dignity rather than need, adds to a compounding body of inner and outer evidence. And at some point, the compound reaches a threshold where it becomes impossible for the world to continue not noticing. The tipping point is often sudden. The accumulation that produced it was always gradual. A past action bears fruit on a timeline the mind could not have predicted. The conversation from 2 years ago that seemed unremarkable at the time is now the basis of an introduction that changes the direction of the work. The piece of content produced without significant attention is now the first thing a significant potential collaborator has seen and has used to form a strong positive impression. The favor done without expectation of return is now the reason someone is advocating on the person's behalf in a room the person does not know exists. Past actions of genuine character operate on their own timeline, independent of the person's current calculation of what is and is not working. They are patient, they are real, and they bear fruit when the conditions are ready. A new invitation appears from a direction the person was not facing. The mind, focused on a specific visible door, does not see the door forming slightly to the left or behind. But when the inner condition has genuinely shifted, the peripheral world responds. A completely unexpected sector of opportunity reveals itself. A skill the person had not thought of as commercially valuable turns out to be exactly what a specific situation requires. A network the person was not actively cultivating produces an unexpected connection. These arrivals are not coincidences in the conventional sense. They are the law delivering through channels the conscious mind was too narrowly focused to have predicted. And they confirm for the person who has built in a condition that the law is operating exactly as Alan described. Confidence changes communication, and change communication changes responses. When the inner condition has genuinely shifted from fear to character, from need to value, from chasing to becoming, the way a person communicates shifts in ways that are subtle but powerful. They hold a pause before speaking rather than rushing to fill the silence. They ask questions from genuine curiosity rather than from the script of an anxious impression manager. They listen without preparing their defense while the other person is still talking. They offer their actual view rather than the view they calculate will be most approved. These changes, expressed consistently, produce different responses from the people encountered, and different responses open different possibilities. Better clients respond. When the inner condition has strengthened and the behavior it produces has changed, the quality of the people who are attracted into the orbit of the person also changes. The clients attracted by desperation and the clients attracted by genuine competence and stable character are different people with different needs, different resources, and different levels of appreciation for what the person offers. The move from one quality of client to the other is not always sudden, but it is consistent with the direction of the inner change. As the inner condition becomes more genuinely excellent, the people it attracts into the work tend to reflect that excellence back through better relationships, better results, and a better experience of the work itself. People begin trusting the viewer, and trust, once established, creates a momentum of its own. The first person to genuinely trust the person of newly built character begins acting in ways that generate secondary trust in others. They refer, they recommend, they advocate. They open doors that the person of new character could not have opened alone. And each person who extends trust and finds that trust well placed becomes a node in a growing network of genuine reputation that travels ahead of the person into rooms and conversations where no direct self-promotion has reached. The world's trust, once earned, works for the person even in the person's absence. And the beginning of that trust is always the same: genuine inner change, expressed in consistent behavior, sustained without applause, long enough for the world to recognize it as real. The inner change is not complete as theory, it must be proven in action. And the action Alan consistently pointed toward was not the dramatic all-or-nothing action of the desperate chaser, betting everything on a single visible door. It was the steady, present, dignified action of walking through the nearest open door with the full commitment of a person who knows their character is load-bearing. The nearest door is not always the most exciting door. It is not always the door that seems most directly connected to the final destination, but it is the door that is open. And walking through it fully is how the inner condition is expressed in the visible world, which is how the next door begins to form. Finish what you start. This is the most concrete and most immediately available proof of inner change. Not the announcement of a new commitment, the completion of the current one, not the declaration of a new discipline, the keeping of the existing one, not the planning of a new project, the finishing of the one that has been almost completed for longer than is comfortable to admit. Finishing is the character act that the chasing pattern most consistently postpones, because finishing requires the inner standard to hold even after the initial excitement has dissipated and the visible audience has moved on to watching something newer. Finish something today, and in the finishing, prove to the inner self that the character is becoming real. Speak with dignity. Every conversation, every communication, every word spoken or written on behalf of the person you are becoming is an expression of the inner condition. Speak with the dignity of someone who knows the value of what they offer without needing to oversell it. Listen with the attention of someone whose inner security does not require every conversation to end in their favor. Respond to difficulty with the steadiness of someone whose identity is not threatened by challenge. The speech habits of a person of genuine character are not performed. They emerge naturally from an inner state that has developed enough stability to express itself without the constant management of a frightened ego. Follow through on what was said. The gap between what a person says they will do and what they actually do is one of the most visible and most honest indicators of the inner condition. Every kept promise, however small, builds inner trustworthiness. Every unkept promise, however small, erodes it. And the inner trustworthiness is more important than the external reputation for trustworthiness, because the external reputation is only as durable as the inner condition it is reflecting. Follow through not to manage your reputation, but to build your character. Do it in the private commitments that no one else is monitoring. Do it in the promise made to yourself at 6 in the morning about what the day would contain. Do it precisely in the places where the chasing pattern has historically allowed the standard to drop. Show up without applause. Pick the work or the practice or the commitment that has been receiving the least external recognition and show up for it tomorrow with the same quality of effort you would bring if the most important person in your field were watching. Not to perform for an imaginary audience, but to practice the inner condition of acting from standard rather than from observation. The person who can bring full effort to unseen work is building the most reliable form of confidence available. The confidence that is not borrowed from the audience, but generated from the inner knowledge of consistent private excellence. Improve the craft, not the image. The chasing pattern consistently invests more in the impression of competence than in actual competence. It manages how the work is presented more carefully than it improves the quality of the work itself. The inner change reverses this. It directs the primary investment of time and attention toward genuine improvement of the skill, the knowledge, the depth of understanding, the quality of the delivery. Because the person of genuine character knows that actual competence is the most powerful and durable form of impression management available. The world eventually encounters real quality and responds to it with a depth of recognition that no amount of careful image management can replicate. Act like success is already becoming your nature, not as a performance for others, as a private inner practice. Ask in the morning, what would the person who is becoming success do today? Then do that. Ask before each major decision, is this the action of someone's success would naturally follow? Then choose the action that matches the answer. Act from the identity of the person you are becoming, rather than from the current visible evidence of where you are. This is not delusion. It is the deliberate, disciplined practice of inner alignment that Alan described as the foundation of every genuine outer transformation. The person who habitually acts from the identity they are building will find that the world gradually begins responding to the identity they are building rather than to the identity they are moving away from. There is a subtle and deeply entrenched pattern that makes the inner change genuinely difficult to make, even for the person who intellectually understands the law and sincerely desires the transformation it promises. That pattern is the false safety of chasing from the outside. Here is why it persists. As long as the problem is located outside the self does not have to change. If success is being withheld by unfair circumstances, by a rigged system, by the behavior of specific people who have failed to recognize the person's worth, then the solution lies in changing those circumstances. those systems, those people, and the self can remain exactly as it is while waiting for the external correction to arrive. This is the false safety trap. It feels like wisdom. It operates as avoidance. If success is unfair, they do not have to grow. And growth, genuine inner growth, is uncomfortable in ways that the chasing pattern never demands. Growth requires the person to encounter the parts of themselves that are not yet built for the success they desire. It requires honest assessment of the gap between the inner condition currently held and the inner condition required. It requires sitting with the discomfort of knowing that the primary obstacle is not external but internal. And the mind, which is very creative in its service of the ego's comfort, will always prefer a narrative in which the obstacle is outside, because that narrative requires no painful self-examination and no threatening inner change. If others are to blame, character remains unchallenged. The blame narrative is perhaps the most effective false safety mechanism in human psychology. When someone else's behavior, someone else's decision, someone else's failure to recognize or respond correctly is identified as the cause of the current situation, the person has successfully removed themselves from the equation. Their character is not the variable being examined, it is the other person's. And examining other people's character is endlessly comfortable compared to examining one's own. The blame narrative can be maintained indefinitely because the world provides a constant supply of people who have genuinely done imperfect things, and any one of them can be recruited as the explanation for why the inner change has not been made. Chasing distracts from becoming. The activity of chasing, the constant outward reach, the continuous monitoring of external channels, the perpetual state of pursuing visible opportunity, keeps the attention so fully occupied with what is outside that the inner life receives no sustained attention. And what receives no sustained attention does not develop. The character remains unbuilt, the habits remain unformed, the thought patterns remain unchanged. And because nothing inward has changed, nothing outward changes in the sustained and reliable way the person is chasing toward. The chasing is not only ineffective, it is the mechanism by which the effective work is perpetually avoided. Becoming requires responsibility. This is the core reason the false safety trap is so tenacious. Becoming requires the person to accept full responsibility for the inner condition from which their outer life is proceeding. Not responsibility in the harsh, blaming sense, but responsibility in the empowering sense. The acknowledgement that the inner condition is not a fixed inheritance, but a buildable structure, and that the quality of the structure is determined by the choices made about what to build it from. This acknowledgement is powerful, but it is also weightier than the false safety of external blame. It says, I have the capacity to change this from the inside, which means I am the one who must do the changing. The old self prefers pursuit without transformation, and this preference must be recognized as the sabotage mechanism it is. The old self is not evil, it is simply oriented toward its own comfort and its own continuation. Any significant inner change represents a threat to the old self's dominance, and the old self is creative and persistent in its resistance to that threat. It manufactures reasons the inner change is not necessary. It finds evidence that the external world is the real problem. It creates urgency around visible chasing, so that the inner work always feels like something to get to after the current external crisis has been resolved. And there is always a current external crisis available, because the external world does not slow down to wait for the inner work to be done. Success requires transformation. This is the absolute and non-negotiable truth that Allen's law places at the center of every genuine prosperity teaching. Not adjustment, not improvement of strategy, not more effort in the same direction from the same inner state. Transformation. A genuine change in the inner condition from which the entire outer life proceeds. This does not mean the destruction of the self or the abandonment of everything that has been built. It means the deliberate, disciplined elevation of the inner standard, the thought, the character, the habits, the speech, the emotional capacity. And it means being willing to prioritize that elevation over the comfortable avoidance of the false safety trap, even when the trap presents itself in the familiar and convincing language of external explanation. The recognition of the false safety trap is not comfortable. It requires the courage to look inward when the old self is pointing outward. It requires the willingness to ask, where am I using the external narrative to avoid the internal work? And it requires the discipline to redirect the answer inward, not as punishment, but as opportunity. Because the inward redirection is where the law actually operates. The inward redirection is where the character is built. The inward redirection is where success, as Alan taught with unmistakable precision, genuinely begins. The most disorienting experience in the inner journey Alan described is the moment when success genuinely arrives and the old inner condition causes it to be rejected or mishandled. This is the moment that proves beyond any theoretical doubt that the inner change is the primary work. Because the outer opportunity is present, the external conditions are available. And yet the old inner state, unchanged beneath the new effort, undermines what has arrived. A door opens, but inconsistency causes it to close again. The opportunity was real. The person was real. But the pattern of inconsistent follow-through, which had been tolerable in smaller contexts, cannot survive the scrutiny of a larger stage. The door closes not because it was never open, but because the inner condition was not yet capable of holding it open. A client arrives, but insecurity ruins the communication. The insecurity expresses itself in the interactions with the client, in the inability to hold the standard when the client pushes back, in the tendency to over-explain and over-qualify, in the need to be approved by the very person who has already chosen to hire. The client who sought a capable and confident provider encounters an anxious one, and the relationship which began with genuine opportunity deteriorates under the weight of an inner condition that could not let it breathe. The opportunity was delivered. The inner condition rejected it. Visibility comes, but fear hides. A moment of genuine exposure arrives. A platform, a conversation, a connection, a context in which the person's real work could be seen by people positioned to respond to it with significant opportunity. And the fear that has been managed and concealed in quieter contexts rises in the face of greater visibility and causes the person to retreat. They produce the safe version of the work. They qualify the message until it has no edge. They present the careful, approved version of themselves that is least likely to be criticized and least likely to change anything. The visibility arrives and passes without consequence, not because the audience was indifferent, but because the inner condition was not ready to be fully seen. Money appears, but the poverty identity misuses it. A genuine inflow of financial resource arrives, and the inner condition that has been operating from lack, from the belief that money is scarce and difficult to attract, handles the arrival in a way that reflects the old identity rather than the new intention. The money is spent from scarcity rather than invested from abundance. It is consumed in response to the relief of its arrival rather than directed toward the building of a condition that would generate the next arrival. The lack identity, even in the presence of money, continues to generate the behaviors of lack. And the money, handled from that inner condition, does not compound. It passes through, and the old condition resumes. Recognition comes, but the viewer needs more validation still. The recognition arrives, the acknowledgement, the praise, the moment of being seen by the right people, and instead of settling the inner question, it temporarily quiets it before the hunger re-emerges. Because recognition was never the answer to the question the inner self was asking. The inner self was asking, am I enough? And external recognition cannot answer that question permanently. It can only quiet it momentarily before the question rises again, louder than before. Because the temporary quieting has confirmed that external recognition is the source of the answer, and external recognition is always, by definition, temporary. The real answer is built inwardly. The permanent settlement of the question requires the inner change, not the next arrival of applause. Opportunity appears, but discipline is missing. The opportunity requires follow-through, and the habit of follow-through has not been built to the depth required. The opportunity requires consistency across a sustained period of time, and the person's pattern of intense effort followed by long disengagement cannot sustain the requirement. The opportunity requires a level of daily private discipline that has not yet been established in the character. The opportunity was delivered exactly as the law prescribed. The inner condition was not ready for it. And this is not a tragedy. It is information. It is the most precise and honest feedback available about what the character-building process still needs to accomplish before the next delivery arrives. Support comes, but pride rejects it. Someone in a position to assist the person's development offers help, connection, guidance, or resource, and the pride of the inner self, which has organized the self-concept around the narrative of independent achievement, refuses it, not always consciously. Sometimes the refusal is disguised as not wanting to impose, as being fine, as not needing anything, but the underlying movement is the old self protecting its story. The story that says, "I built this alone," or "I have not built anything and am unwilling to be seen in that state by someone who could help." Both versions of the story serve the same function. They reject the delivery that the law has organized through an unexpected channel. Success approaches, but the person is not ready to hold it. This is the summary of every form of rejected delivery, and it is not a condemnation. It is a call to the most important work available. The readiness to hold success is the readiness of the inner condition to receive, sustain, and responsibly manage what genuine success brings with it. That readiness is not a natural endowment. It is built. It is built through the patient, unglamorous, consistent work of becoming that Alan described throughout his writing. The question is not whether success will approach again. The law guarantees that it will, as long as the inner condition is building. The question is whether the inner condition will be ready to receive it when it arrives. And the answer to that question is being written right now in the daily choices about thought, character, habit, and the direction of becoming. The fear signal is the internal broadcast that confirms the chasing pattern is still active. Learn to recognize it precisely, because it disguises itself in the language of practicality, of realism, of wisdom, and of care. The first fear signal says, "I need to be chosen." Notice when this sentence is operating beneath an action, when the drive to send the message, to submit the application, to perform the service, to present the work, is rooted not in genuine confidence, but in the need for someone outside to choose and thereby confirm. The action itself may be appropriate, but the inner state driving it determines the quality of the action, and the quality of the action determines the quality of the result. The second fear signal says, "I am behind." This signal compares the person's visible position to an imagined timeline of where they should be by now, and interprets every moment of not being there yet as confirmation of permanent inadequacy rather than as information about what the inner change still needs to produce. Behind whom? Behind what timeline? Against what standard? The fear signal does not ask these questions. It simply announces the judgment and waits for the panic it produces to generate more chasing behavior that will hopefully close the imagined gap before it is too late. The corrective is not to argue with the signal, but to redirect the energy it generates back toward the building of inner condition. The third signal says, "No one sees me." This signal interprets the current period of invisible building as evidence that nothing is working, that the effort is wasted, that the world has looked and found nothing worth noticing. But the invisible building period is not evidence of failure. It is the necessary phase of character development that precedes the world's recognition. The world sees what is genuinely there when the accumulation has reached the point of visibility. Demanding to be seen before the accumulation is ready is not impatience. It is the fear signal using the language of urgency to interrupt the building process at precisely the most critical phase. The fourth signal says, "I must prove myself," and the fifth says, "Success is for others." Both of these signals share the same root. The belief that the person's worthiness to receive success is a question that has not yet been answered in their favor. The proving impulse drives frantic performance. The "success is for others" belief drives quiet resignation and the subtle but real withdrawal from the inner work of building. Both signals must be heard, recognized for what they are, and met with the same corrective. I become the person success follows. Not I prove myself, not I wait for permission. I become. And becoming is neither performance nor waiting. It is building. It is the active, directed daily work of inner change. The sixth signal is perhaps the most insidious. If I stop chasing, I will lose. This signal makes the chasing pattern feel not merely comfortable, but necessary. It frames becoming as passive. It frames release as surrender. It insists that the only protection against falling behind is constant outward reaching, constant monitoring of external channels, constant visible pursuit of every possible confirmation that the effort is producing something. But Allen's law does not support this anxiety. The law says that the energy spent in frantic chasing would be better directed toward the building of inner condition. Not because rest is the answer, but because disciplined becoming is a more efficient generator of outer success than desperate chasing. Stop chasing from fear, build from character, and let the law deliver. The corrective line, heard clearly and repeated with genuine intention, is this: I become the person success follows. Speak it not as a wish, not as a declaration of what you hope will eventually be true. Speak it as an orientation, as the announcement of a direction that the inner life is already moving in, even if the outer life has not yet caught up with the movement. The corrective line is a redirection of inner attention from the outside, where the fear signal lives, to the inside, where the building is happening. Return to it whenever the fear signal rises. Return to it when the chasing impulse offers itself as the only available action. Return to it when the world appears silent, and let it be the compass that keeps the inner direction true. The correction practice begins with catching the chasing impulse before it has fully expressed itself in action. This requires a quality of inner attention that is built slowly through practice. Begin observing the moments when the urge to reach outward arises, not to judge it, but to see it clearly. Notice the inner state it is coming from. Is it coming from genuine opportunity recognized by a calm inner mind? Or is it coming from the anxious need to do something, anything, that produces a visible movement toward the confirmation the inner self is seeking? This distinction, made honestly and repeatedly, is the first step of the correction. Ask, at the moment of the impulse, what inner change is required here? This question immediately redirects attention from the outer action to the inner condition. Instead of asking, what should I do next? Ask, what should I become more fully, in order for the right action to emerge naturally from genuine character. This is not paralysis. It is the brief but essential pause in which the direction of the effort is recalibrated from the outside in to the inside out. The question does not delay action indefinitely. It ensures that the action taken belongs to the person you are becoming rather than to the fear you are running from. Choose one disciplined action from the answer that arises. The correction is not accomplished by reflection alone. It is accomplished by action that expresses the inner change. After asking what inner change is required, act on the answer. If the answer is that consistency is required, take one concrete step toward consistency today. If the answer is that genuine competence development is required, commit 1 hour to the craft today. If the answer is that dignity is required in a specific communication, rewrite the communication from the inner state of the person you are becoming, rather than from the anxiety of the person who needs to be chosen. The disciplined action is small, it is immediate, and it is taken without requiring a visible return. Do it without needing applause. This is the test. The action taken correctly from the correction practice will not feel rewarding in the way external validation feels rewarding. It will feel different, quieter, deeper. It will feel like the satisfaction of alignment, the inner confirmation that this action belongs to the person you are building. That is the correct feeling. That is the inner applause of character, and it is more reliable and more sustaining than any external applause the chasing pattern could ever produce. Practice recognizing this inner confirmation as the signal of the correction having been made accurately. Over time, it becomes recognizable and trustworthy. Repeat until character becomes stable. The correction practice is not a one-time intervention. It is a daily, ongoing, repeated exercise in redirecting the inner orientation from fear to becoming. Each repetition builds a small deposit in the character account. Each deposit makes the next repetition slightly easier, because the character is slightly stronger, the inner standard slightly more established, the fear signal slightly less dominant. The accumulation of these small, quiet, unglamorous corrections is how the inner change described by Alan actually happens in real life. Not in a single dramatic moment of transformation, but in the patient, repeated practice of choosing character over chasing day after day, until the character becomes the default and the chasing impulse arrives less often, with less force, and with less power to determine the action. Let success follow the change. This is the final instruction of the correction practice, and it is also an act of genuine trust. Once the inner work has been honestly done, once the discipline has been maintained and the character has been built, the practice requires a release. The release of the demand to see immediate evidence that the work is producing results. Let success follow, not because results do not matter, but because demanding their immediate visible appearance is itself a form of the chasing pattern returning through the back door. The work is real. The law is reliable. The inner change, genuinely made and consistently maintained, will produce its outer consequence in the fullness of the time required. Trust the law enough to let it work. The new identity available to you through this teaching is not a persona crafted for external presentation. It is an inner orientation toward yourself, your work, your worth, and your relationship with success that replaces the chasing pattern at the foundational level. The new identity says, with the quiet authority of genuine inner conviction, I do not chase from fear. Not because fear has been entirely eliminated, not because the challenges of the visible world have disappeared, but because fear is no longer the source from which action proceeds. The action proceeds now from character, from the disciplined inner standard, from the consistent application of the becoming that Alan described as the only genuine source of lasting outer prosperity. I become success in thought, character, and action. This statement is the living description of the new identity. In thought, the habitual thinking is now oriented toward the inner condition required, not the external proof demanded. In character, the pattern of private discipline, kept promises, and unglamorous follow-through is building something real that the world will eventually encounter as genuine. In action, every step taken is evaluated against the question of whether it belongs to the person success would naturally follow. Thought, character, and action aligned in this direction do not require the world's daily confirmation. They are self-sustaining. They build momentum from within, and the momentum over time becomes visible. Success recognizes the person I am becoming. This is the full expression of Alan's law applied to personal identity. Success is not a distant prize waiting to be captured by the most aggressive pursuer. It is a condition of the inner life that, when genuinely built and consistently expressed, the outer world recognizes and responds to with trust, opportunity, invitation, and resource. The person who has genuinely made the inner change does not need to announce it to the world. The world will encounter it and respond. The recognition begins quietly and builds consistently, and the recognition, when it arrives, feels different from the validation the chasing pattern was seeking. It feels like confirmation of something already true, rather than a rescue from something still uncertain. The new financial identity is not a state of permanent perfection. It is a direction of permanent becoming. It will be tested. The fear signal will return. The chasing impulse will offer itself as a solution. Old patterns will knock on the inner door when external conditions apply sufficient pressure. The new identity does not pretend these tests will not come. It is prepared for them. It has practiced the correction. It knows the signal. It knows the question to ask. It knows the disciplined action to choose. And each test met with the correction practice adds another layer of genuine strength to the inner condition being built. The identity becomes more resilient with each test, not because the tests become easier, but because the person meeting them becomes more genuinely capable. The financial dimension of this new identity is a natural consequence of everything the inner change produces. Trust, earned through consistent character, generates the kind of professional relationships that produce financial opportunity. Competence, built through disciplined practice, produces work of a quality that commands fair compensation. Genuine confidence, grown from accumulated private excellence, allows the person to hold their standard in financial negotiations without the collapse of desperation. And the expectation of surprise, built into the inner orientation of someone who trusts the law and releases the how, keeps the person open to financial opportunities arriving from directions the chasing mind was never monitoring. The financial result is real. It follows the inner change as reliably as effect follows cause. This new identity is already available to you, not when the circumstances change, not when the external world provides the conditions that would make inner change feel safe. Now, in the present moment, the direction of becoming is available in this moment, in the next decision, in the next action, in the next choice of whether to speak the language of the old identity or the language of the person you are becoming. Allen's Law has no waiting list. It responds to the genuine inner shift whenever and wherever that shift is made. The new identity begins the moment you stop performing the old one and start building the genuine one. The architecture of this teaching rests on a foundation that is worth holding clearly now that the full structure has been presented. Success follows character, not strategy alone, not effort alone, not timing alone, character. The inner condition of the person who pursues success determines whether success follows them or continues to withdraw. And character is not a quality the person either possesses or lacks. It is a buildable structure, built from habitual thought, expressed through consistent behavior, measured by private discipline, and accumulated into a reputation that the world eventually encounters as trust. Character follows repeated thought. Allen was precise and unsparing about this. The person who thinks habitually from fear will build a character shaped by fear. The person who habitually redirects their thought toward the inner condition of genuine competence, dignity, and calm confidence will build a character that expresses those qualities in behavior. The thought is the upstream variable. It determines everything downstream. Changing the thought changes the character over time. Changing the character changes the behavior. Changing the behavior changes the reputation. Changing the reputation changes the trust. Changing the trust changes the opportunity. Changing the opportunity changes the visible life. Chasing from fear repels. This remains the central corrective truth of the entire teaching. Not because the act of pursuit is wrong, but because the inner state from which the pursuit proceeds determines what the pursuit attracts. Fear-based pursuit broadcasts a signal of insufficiency. Insufficiency repels the kind of trust-based opportunity that genuine success requires. Character-based action broadcasts a signal of reliability. Reliability attracts the world's trust, and trust, as the teaching has shown in detail, is the primary currency through which invisible inner change converts into visible outer opportunity. Repel or attract, fear or character. The choice is always available. Becoming creates attraction. This is the entire practical summary of Allen's philosophy. The work is not primarily to do more. The work is primarily to become more genuinely competent, more consistently disciplined, more emotionally mature, more capable of receiving what arrives without the old condition mishandling it, more able to act without applause, more trusting of the law when the visible channels are silent. Every increment of genuine becoming strengthens the inner field. Every strengthening of the inner field increases the attraction. And the attraction, sustained long enough, produces results that the chasing pattern could never have manufactured, because they arise from a depth of character that the world recognizes as genuine. Discipline stabilizes identity. Without discipline, the new identity cannot hold under pressure. The identity must be practiced daily in the small choices that no one sees, in the private work that receives no recognition, in the response to difficulty that no audience is evaluating, in the maintenance of the inner standard when the external conditions make the lower standard entirely excusable. These private disciplines are the structural support of the new identity, and the new identity, structurally supported, does not collapse when the outer world applies its tests. It holds, and the holding over time becomes the most powerful statement of genuine character available. Success follows the inner change. This is the conclusion, not luck, not timing. Not connection alone, though connection follows character. Not effort alone, though effort is necessary. The inner change, the genuine shift in the condition from which every thought, word, and action proceeds. Alan taught this with the calm certainty of a person who had observed the law operating in every human life that applied it honestly. It is not a promise of instant wealth. It is a description of how wealth, in its deepest and most lasting form, actually moves. It moves toward character. It follows becoming. It arrives for the person who has built the inner condition to receive it and the discipline to hold it. And it follows, reliably, inevitably. As the law requires, you do not need to stop desiring success. Let that be heard clearly, because some of what this teaching has said might be misread as a call to detachment from desire, to the passive release of ambition, to the spiritual bypassing of the genuine human hunger for a better life. That is not what Alan taught, and it is not what this teaching is offering. The desire for success is not the problem. The desire for growth, for genuine contribution, for financial freedom, for the expression of your full capacity, for the building of something that lasts. These desires are legitimate, powerful, and precisely the kind of inner fire that the law can work with when it is directed correctly. You need to stop using success as proof of worth. That is the distinction. That is the line between the hunger that grasps and the desire that builds. When success becomes the evidence required to settle the inner question of whether you are enough, then the desire has been contaminated by fear. And the contaminated desire, as the teaching has shown in detail, cannot attract what it is reaching for, because the contamination signals to the world an inner condition that has not yet become capable of receiving and sustaining what it demands. Clean the desire. Return it to its original and powerful form, the genuine, disciplined, character-driven intention to become more, contribute more, and receive more as the natural consequence of becoming more. You become worthy in action before the world applauds. This is the most direct emotional reframe this teaching can offer. Worthiness is not granted by applause. It is built in action. Every time you keep the private discipline, every time you choose character over comfort, every time you finish what you started without needing recognition to complete it, every time you act with dignity in a context that would forgive undignified action, every time you redirect the fear signal back toward the inner work, you are building worthiness, real worthiness, the kind that does not require the world's confirmation to be genuine. And the world, when it encounters this kind of worthiness, confirms it, not as a favor, but as the recognition of something unmistakably real. The tiredness you have been feeling in the chasing pattern is not weakness. It is information. It is the inner self communicating that the direction of effort has been wrong, not the quantity of effort. You have been working hard in many cases. You have been trying. The problem was never the trying. The problem was the inner condition of the trying. The exhaustion is the evidence that the old pattern has reached the limits of what it can produce, and the reaching of those limits is often the most important moment in the inner journey, because it is the moment when the old method loses its grip and the new direction becomes genuinely available. The tiredness, heard as information rather than defeat, is the beginning of the transformation. From this day forward, you have a different measure available to you than the one the chasing pattern offered. The chasing pattern measured progress by external confirmation, by the sales, by the applause, by the metrics, by the recognition. The new measure is internal, by the discipline maintained, by the character built, by the thought redirected, by the action taken from becoming rather than from fear. This internal measure is more honest, more reliable, and more directly connected to the law that governs outer success than any external metric. Use it. Trust it, build from it, and let the external confirmation arrive as the consequence of the internal building, in the order the law requires. In the timing, the building itself determines. The person you are becoming already exists as a possibility within you. Alan did not write for people who needed to acquire entirely new natures from the outside. He wrote for people whose genuine nature was already pointed toward growth, already hungry for genuine success, already capable of building character, but who had been operating from the wrong inner map. The map has now been corrected. The law has been described. The practice has been laid out. What remains is the doing, the daily, consistent, unglamorous character-building doing, from which, as Alan taught with unmistakable precision, and this teaching has sought to honor with the same seriousness, success will follow. The 7-day challenge begins tomorrow morning, and it begins with a single question asked before every major action, every significant decision, every important communication, every choice between the character-building path and the comfort-seeking path. The question is this: is this the action of someone success would naturally follow? Ask it honestly. Ask it without immediately defending the action you were already planning to take. Sit with the question long enough for the genuine answer to arise from the inner condition rather than from the ego's immediate justification. The answer, when heard honestly, will almost always tell you something useful. Either the action belongs to the person you are becoming, which is confirmation to proceed, or it belongs to the old pattern, which is information to redirect. For 7 days, choose the action that matches the person success would naturally follow. Not the action that feels easiest. Not the action most likely to produce immediate visible confirmation. Not the action that requires the least inner courage or the smallest departure from the familiar comfort zone. The action of the person's success would follow. Sometimes that action is small and quiet. Finishing the thing, improving the craft, keeping the promise, speaking with dignity, showing up without applause. Sometimes it is larger and more demanding, but in every case, the standard is the same. Would success recognize this person? Would the world, encountering this action and the inner condition from which it arose, feel the quality of trustworthy character at work? Do this for 7 days before you evaluate the results. Do not stop on day 3 because the visible world has not yet responded with confirmation. Do not stop on day 5 because the old pattern feels more comfortable than the new one. 7 days of genuine practice, of real inner observation and real character-aligned action will produce something you will be able to feel clearly by day 7. Not necessarily a visible external change, though those often begin in this window. A change in the inner condition itself. A slightly stronger field. A slightly more stable identity. A slightly clearer sense that the direction is right and that the law is operating exactly as it should. That inner change, however subtle, is the beginning of everything else. After 7 days, begin again. 7 more days, and 7 more after that. The challenge is not a week-long experiment. It is the first week of a lifelong practice of becoming. Alan did not describe the law of character as a short-term intervention. He described it as the fundamental principle of human development, operating continuously in every person's life, whether they are aware of it and working with it or not. Choose to be aware of it. Choose to work with it deliberately, honestly, and with the full commitment that genuine inner transformation requires. And let every week become a period of genuine measurement, not of external results alone, but of the inner condition, the character, and the becoming from which outer success will inevitably follow. Before you leave this teaching, leave a comment that tells the community what inner change you are practicing right now, not what you are chasing, not what you are hoping the world will deliver, what you are building within, what character you are developing, what discipline you are maintaining without applause, what habit of thought, speech, or action you have chosen to align with the person's success would naturally follow. Your comment is your declaration. It is the spoken order sent from the inner self to the becoming that is already in process. Speak it clearly, mean it genuinely, and let it carry the weight of Alan's law behind it, that the spoken word, proceeding from genuine inner intention, sets the inner conditions of the outer life into a new and more powerful alignment. Share this teaching with someone who is exhausted from chasing and has not yet understood why the chasing is not delivering what it promises. Not everyone is ready to receive this teaching when they encounter it, but for the person who has run the chasing pattern long enough to feel its limitations at a deep level, this is the teaching that changes the direction. The person who most needs this shift right now is someone in your life. Send it to them, not with a lecture, not with the suggestion that they have been doing it wrong, with the simple gift of a teaching that has the power to reorient the inner compass towards something more reliable than the pattern that has been producing exhaustion. The teaching began with a reversal, and it is time to return to it, because the reversal is not only the opening of the script, it is the organizing truth of everything Alan pointed toward. You were told to chase success. You were told the distance between you and success was simply a question of effort, of hunger, of wanting it badly enough. And you have been chasing, and the chasing has produced some results and considerable exhaustion. What Alan taught, with the calm authority of a person who had seen the law operating in every human life without exception, was that the relationship between the person and success was not primarily a relationship of pursuit. It was a relationship of becoming. Not chasing success, becoming it. The inner change Alan described is not a secret held by a privileged few. It is a law accessible to every person willing to build from the inside out, to redirect thought from fear to character, to build habits of genuine competence and private discipline, to release the demand for immediate visible confirmation, to trust the law enough to act without applause, to release the how while holding the what, to walk through the nearest open door, to correct the chasing impulse and replace it with the becoming practice. Every one of these steps is available to you in the life you are already living, with the resources you already have, beginning in the next choice you make. You came to this teaching carrying the exhaustion of pursuit. You may leave it with something the pursuit was never able to provide, the orientation of genuine becoming. The inner map that places the real work not in the frantic external reaching, but in the patient internal building. The understanding that the law operates with precision, that character is buildable, that trust is earned, that doors form in response to genuine inner change, and that success, properly understood, does not require you to chase it. It requires you to become it. And becoming is already available. It has been available in every private discipline you practiced without praise, in every act of character you maintained when no one was watching, in every moment when you chose the higher inner standard over the comfortable lower one. When the inner change is real, success no longer feels hunted. It begins to follow the person you have become, not because the world has softened or because the circumstances have aligned miraculously, but because the law which has always operated and which Alan described with such faithful precision has finally been given the material it requires: genuine character, consistent discipline, directed thought, trusting action, and the quiet, certain, unglamorous, magnificent work of becoming. When that work is real, the law responds, and what it brings is not merely external success. It is the deep, settled, unshakable prosperity of a person who no longer needs the world to confirm their worth, because the worth has been built from within, exactly where James Allen said it was always meant to begin.